All right, it's 8:02 and we've got so much to tell you. Let's get started. So my name is Jason King with Dover Cullen Partners. We are a town planning firm. We get to work around the country. We would be in Las Cruces tonight, live, but can't for obvious reasons. And so we appreciate you joining us. We're gonna film this presentation, record it, so that way and put it up on our website and other people are going to be able to watch. I'm an urban designer and planner, and our firm, Dover Cullen Partners, is working with Sierra Norte Development. They are the developer of this project. We're working with a local civil engineering firm, SMA. We're working with the city, and we're working with the public in order to turn Mesa Vista into the next great neighborhood in Las Cruces. All of our work is going to be put up on the website, mesavistamasterplan.com. And you'll see mesavistamasterplan.com in the bottom left-hand corner. That's where this recording will be. And I hope you're able to direct people to that website. It's a fully interactive website. Right now it's got polls, it's got films, and as we proceed in this project, we're going to be pinning up our work, tacking it up digitally, and seeking feedback. We'll keep you informed of all of the events, and we'll really have a back and forth conversation. Now, Mesa Vista is a new community, and Sierra Norte has assembled a multidisciplinary team to work on that. I'm going to introduce you to the site, tell you where it is, and then I'll talk about possibilities there. Town center, a walkable mixed-use community. Another planner from Dover Cullen Partners, Rob Piatowski, will talk about walking and biking. We've got Victor Dover, founding principal of Dover Cullen Partners, and he'll be talking about the 5 principles of neighborhood design. This is the standard that we're going to hold ourselves to. Rob will then talk about the next steps and about the public charrette. And then we've got a Q&A. And I think we can do all this presenting in about 45 minutes to an hour. And then we can spend as much time as you'd like talking planning in the Q&A. All right. Mesa Vista is about an 800-acre plat, which is east of downtown Las Cruces, out on Highway 70, close to the Oregon Mountains High School, which was formerly, until very recently, the Onote High School. It's an area which is where growth in a lot of ways is headed. There's a lot of development pressure in that area. The energy is moving that way. And what we are going to do with the public is we're going to help imagine what that could look like. This is our virtual site visit. So yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we have a series of meetings with stakeholders, with owners, with elected representatives, and we're doing this meeting tonight. And our job is to create 3 scenarios, 3 possibilities for the Mesa Vista site. And these 3 scenarios are going to be what the public can vote on. The scenarios are going to be conventional development. If Sierra Norte just takes the land development regulations off the shelf and designs according to those existing regulations, we'll look at what we would get. The other 2 options are what we call creative development. And we want your help trying to imagine that. You know, development is coming to that area. The pressure is very, very strong. And Las Cruces has done a good job continuing to build. It's a big part of the local economy. It's a big part of the tax base. And Las Cruces has in a lot of ways avoided the affordable housing crunch, although it still exists. But they've avoided a lot of the problems other places have not, and places that have become absolutely unaffordable by continuing to build. New Mexico is a great sunny state where people want to be. The population is growing, and our job is to make sure that new development isn't a bad neighbor, that it adds to the life, to the quality of life of the people currently living there. and that it's a good neighbor and that it's a regional asset. And that's what we're gonna need you to help us figure out. So 3 different scenarios will be created. On Friday, we'll put them up and you're able to vote on them. Then August 31st to September 4th is our virtual charrette. Now tonight is kind of like a webinar. You're welcome to go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see let's see, you'll see a raise hand icon and you'll see a chat icon. When we get to the queue, you can chat at any point, you can raise your hand at any point. When we get to the Q&A, we'll be addressing what we see in the chat and we'll be answering questions. The charrette will be different. The charrette will be much more interactive and we'll be drawing while there's meetings going on. There'll be a back and forth conversation with the engineers and the landscape architects and the architects and the economists and the transportation professionals. The charrette is a lot of fun because we bring everybody together and we work to create a place everyone can get excited about. Then we synthesize that plan, we put that out, everything goes on the website, like I said, public comment, formal approval process, and we continue to refine the plan until it's unanimously adopted by everyone. That's our goal. Our objective is to create a vision for a unique, mixed-use, walkable, conservation-oriented community in Las Cruces. Now, the Mesa Vista site, as I said, south of the Organ Mountains High School, is a large one. And it breaks down into 3 different forms of ownership, really. There's the area in yellow that's owned by Sierra Norte along Highway 70. There's this area in dark blue. This is an area that Sierra Norte has a planning and development lease on. And that lease requires a master plan to the State Land Office and the city. So a master planning process is required. To Sierra Norte's credit, they want maximum public involvement. They want to talk to as many people as possible. A plan's required, but they want to go above and beyond. And then just east of that is the light blue area. And that's a spot where Sierra Norte has a lease application pending. And you put them all together, and that's the area that we're thinking about. We've got neighbors to the west, we've got the school, we've got neighbors to the north. Down south, there are emerging neighborhoods. There's emerging neighborhoods to the east. Our job is the optimal mix of uses, and our job is to create a great place. Now, we're guided by the Elevate Las Cruces Comprehensive Plan, a comprehensive plan that was recently adopted and which a lot of us had a chance to participate in the creation of. According to the comprehensive plan, there's a future development map. And that shows colors, you know. It shows the orange for suburban neighborhood, the red for regional commercial along Highway 70, and then the greens for rural reserve and rural neighborhood. What this tells us is, you know, development is moving toward the Organ Mountains. We started to reach a point where the arroyos are deep and the views are beautiful and the habitat quality is high. And so now development needs to coexist with the natural environment that's there. So something different is required in this area. And then the other thing, and this is what attracted us to this project. The Elevate Las Cruces has a place type overlay map. And you don't see this much in comprehensive plans. It's innovative. And it says, you know, a town center in this location. The comprehensive plan identified that there's no center. There's no central place that people can go to out east. And it says here, there's already the school, there's development all around, and there's an opportunity to create the town center. Now we take that town center circle that appears in the comprehensive plan and we place it, you know, on top of the Mesa Vista area. And you see that all 3 of these, the private land, the existing New Mexico State Land Office lease, the proposed New Mexico State Land Office lease, those are all going to be necessary in order to actually create a center. In order to create a walkable mixed-use environment that's got enough rooftops and people can walk there and people can bike there, it's going to take all 800 acres. This is not a town center, you know. This is conventional development. It is those little red roofs are houses, and the yellow-orange are yards, and there's the white of the streets. And that's fine. It's houses, people need places to live, and that makes sense. A lot of the country and a lot of New Mexico looks like this, and that is fine. But a town center is a unique opportunity to do something different. You can imagine and this being one way to develop. This is the conventional development. This is kind of what our scenario one would look like. We do nothing, this. And if we design more creatively, then it would look more like this. And you can see the green of a small plaza or placita in the middle. You can see apartments or townhomes or rental units around that. And then it feathers out to single family houses that are smaller, and then single family houses that are larger. And then by the time you reach the end, ranches and large units. There's diversity. Within a 5-minute walk, you go from center to edge. It isn't just a square mile of houses, it's a lot of things. It's a traditional neighborhood, the way neighborhoods used to be built. You know, when we were working on the comprehensive plan and we tried to get a feel for what was going on out east, we went to TripAdvisor. You know, and what did TripAdvisor say? It advised us to, as tourists from out of town, to stay near Old Mesilla. It was an area that was safe, unique, and beautiful. And when it came to out east, to the East Mesa area, it said there's a lot of new development on the East Mesa, and it's very safe, but it lacks personality. Everything is box stores and strip malls. And that just seems kind of tragic. You know, thus the center idea. So let's talk a little bit about what a town center is. You know, there's the little town of Oregon, you know, way out east. And for a little while there, they had a Thai restaurant and the cool little shop. And that was it. And it was kind of this like little Main Street building without a main street around it. And it was very popular and everyone went there. And it was the tiniest little increment of placemaking and urbanism. It was the smallest little, you know, town center. And it was so tremendously popular. It doesn't take much. If the world is big boxes and commercial and Taco Bells, it doesn't take much in order to do placemaking. Now, around the country and around the region, places like Uptown, Albuquerque are building new town centers. I like the substation in El Paso. It's just 3 little buildings facing each other, creating a spot, Edison bulb lights and music playing, and it's a tiny little spot to go. Montecillo in El Paso attempted the same kind of concept, multi-story living next to a cinema and some stores. It's connected on a transit line. All of this stuff here is walkable, more or less. You know, so far, the effort to create a great town center hasn't exactly panned out. We see around the country places where it has, however. You know, I love Serenbe near Atlanta. This looks like brand new construction. I'm sorry, it looks like historic construction. That looks like a main street that's been there for a long time on an old train line and clapboard houses. But this is actually brand new construction. And Serenbe created a new main street. And then within just a short walk, there are attached units, affordable relatively, units for younger people and for older people. And a short walk away are single family houses. And then by virtue of building densely in one area along that main street, they're able to reserve other area. They have horse barn and facilities for people to ride. I like Baldwin Park near Orlando. This was a decommissioned Navy base, and they built a main street that has the chains. I always talk about the Burger and Fry place and the Subway store and the CVS pharmacy, but instead of being a single building surrounded by parking, it's put into a main street format. It's like instead of the omelet and all the pieces are separated, they took the pieces, the place to work, the place to live, and the place to shop, and they put them all together. And the formula is similar. There's still the attached units and the apartments, the single family houses, and then big green spaces in order for people to have a place to be. Newtown, St. Charles, the architecture looks really different. Here outside of St. Louis, it's brick, but there's the center, the neighborhood, and the edge area. What these areas all have in common is a kind of formula. It's called form-based coding, and they use transects instead of zones. And I'll talk about that in a second. In the waters near Montgomery, Alabama, instead of the attached units, it's little tiny cottage court homes, which people love. And they're surrounded by a kind of green belt. It isn't about the architecture. The Savano new community outside of Tucson very much looks Pueblo and Southwest, but it's still a place that mixes people of different kinds, a variety of housing types for a variety of people. In HAMPSTEAD near Montgomery, Alabama, they've got a plaza where there's farmers markets and this little parade, and there's the smaller houses, and they have a community-supported agriculture. These provide a kind of urban experience, and like there's a big red barn and there's people playing the fiddle, but it's urban in that there's the ability to talk to people and get to know people, and see people at the farmers market and go to a little cafe and sit outside. And that's important for attracting and retaining young people who might have otherwise left for the urbanism of San Francisco or for Austin. These new communities are different than what you ordinarily see. When it's one house after another and they all look the same or pretty much the same, that's not creating community. There's that formula. There's those T5, T4, T3 numbers. One of the questions for us when we create these new communities is how much of each, right? How much T5 urban area? How much T1 natural zone? How much do people want to live in the ranchettes, the rural zone, and how much are they interested in the apartments where there's not a yard to maintain, and they have more affordable living? This is a question for you to help us with. What should be the formula? Okay, now let's do this. We're moving into the polling questions. We've got a couple different opportunities tonight for us to poll you. We've got nearly 3 dozen people on the line. Let's move into questions.
All right. So a new screen should have popped up. If you're on a computer, if you're on a smartphone, you may not be able to participate in these polling questions, but you will be able to participate in the question and answers at the end and talking. And so in that pop-up window, you should see 3 different questions. And so we'll just go through these. We'll give you a few minutes, and I'll quickly walk you through each of them. So the first one is, how long have you lived or worked in Las Cruces? And you'll be able to answer less than 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 11 to 20 years, 21 to 40 years, 41 to 60 years, more than 60 years, or I don't live or work here.
In order to answer the question, you just click near that percentage bar, and it'll turn blue, and you've answered the question.
And then as you scroll down, you'll see some additional questions. So about a third of you have already answered. The second one is, what are your primary interests in Mesa Vista? And this one you can choose multiple, up to 2. Either you live nearby, or you want to buy a new home, or you work nearby, or in the community, you want more areas with a better quality of life, or you're a builder or otherwise involved in real estate.
There's a little gray bar on the side that you use to scroll down until you see all of the questions. But it looks like people are not having a problem.
And then the last question is, what does Eastern Las Cruces need the most that Mesa Vista could provide? Again, this is another multiple choice question, so feel free to pick up to 2 or 3. First one is more trails and access to natural amenities and outdoor passive recreation. Second is a town square or plaza. Third is a variety of housing types and prices. Streets that are safe and comfortable for walking and biking. Preservation of open space. Affordable living. community center and active recreation fields, or then other. So over 2/3 have answered the questions, so maybe we'll just give it one more minute and let you all read through and add your response. And if you have a question, or feel free to type it into the chat box, and one of us can answer.
You've probably figured out by now that the third question is really hard to answer because it asks you to pick 2 from a list of things that might all seem important. And we realize that you are definitely going to, on a list like that, going to see more than one thing, 1 or 2 things that you are interested in. But we want you to do the hard work of picking 2 that rise to the top of your list, that seem even higher priority. That's the 2 you pick.
And then, through the process, we'll be, when we have a plan, we'll be using this format to ask you what you think. When we have a trail system plan, for instance, or a look to the town center, we'll be continuing to poll. And the polling also continues online on the website.
We'll just give it maybe 20 more seconds. I think nearly everyone has responded now. All right, so I'm going to share the results now, and we can walk through these. So you should be able to see the results and scroll through them. So when we look at number 1, how long have you lived or worked in Las Cruces? We have a bit of a mix of people less than 5 years, and for quite a while, from 21 to 40 years. Most people have been 5 to 20 years is really the amount that most people have been there. So people have been living in the city for a while, and then a few people don't live or work there, may have other interests in the site. And if you scroll down using the gray bar on the side of that window, you'll be able to see the results for the second question, is what are your primary interests in Mesa Vista? So for the vast majority, it's people that, in the meeting tonight, is people that live nearby. Nearly 3/4 of you have picked that. Small percentage work nearby. And then there's others that want to see more areas with a better quality of life, or otherwise involved in real estate or a builder. But it's really important that we get the perspectives of everyone, and especially those that live nearby, and how this project can benefit them. And if you scroll down, we can see the results for the last question. What does Eastern Las Cruces need the most that Mesa Vista could provide? And here we have more of a spread than the others. Preservation of open space, about 50% have selected that. And there's also a large percentage for a town square or a plaza, some sort of destination that may not really exist yet in the area. There's also some for more trails and access to natural space, and a large amount for streets that are safe and comfortable for walking and biking. And at the bottom, again, community center and active recreation fields. So these are really interesting results, and will help us as we move forward in this process.
I can't help but see we've got people who have lived in the area for a long time. We've got a lot of neighbors who live nearby, and we've got neighbors who are interested in the preservation of open space. Those are like the top 3.
So now I will start sharing my screen. Right, so you should now see hiking and biking. Great. So there's three other key documents and plans that the city of Las Cruces has developed and had adopted over the past couple of years that are really going to help shape what the future of Mesa Vista can be, especially as it relates to hiking and biking. And these are in addition to Elevate Las Cruces comprehensive plan. All right. The first one is the active transportation plan. This one identifies existing and proposed locations for hiking and biking facilities across the entire city. You can see the red star, which shows the location approximately of where Mesa Vista is. In the hiking one, there's not really any trails or paths currently in existence, and it's on the edges of the ones that are planned. And then in the biking, it's a similar situation, except there is an east-west bike route across the site that is proposed in the active transportation plan. So with Mesa Vista's location here, it's a real opportunity to tie into these trail networks and perhaps offer some trailheads in places where people can park and have a water or a restroom facility to begin exploring down some of these paths and hiking and biking trails shown on these maps and others, as well as for people looking to go further east into the Oregon Mountains. The second plan that's really informative and helping to shape what the future of Mesa Vista can be is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which has recently been adopted. And so this one takes a look at parkland service area gaps as well as multi-use trail area gaps. And again, the red star indicates the location of Mesa Vista. And if we take a closer look, you can see the red outline of the project site. And really it's showing that there are quite a bit of gaps in this area in terms of having access, convenient access to any sort of park space. Essentially within the entire study area, there's none within the walk sheds that were identified through this planning effort. And similarly, there's no multi-use trail that serves this area either, or the surrounding communities that can be easily accessed within the walk sheds identified. And so this document also, on the right side on the multi-use trails, does highlight some proposed trails in places where new connections can be made or new trails can be put in, which would help create more access to multi-use trails, as well as better access using those trails to some of the existing parkland in the area. And so these are two documents that we're going to look at very carefully and closely as we move forward with the design process. Not only do they talk about parks and trails, but they also relate to street design, road design, and how all those pieces fit together. And the third document that's an essential one for Mesa Vista is the Arroyo Management Plan. A large percentage and a lot of area of Mesa Vista, the 800 acres that we're looking at, are covered with arroyos of various sizes, from the large primary ones, the Alameda Arroyo, to smaller finger ones. How these will be integrated into the plan is something that we need to be really careful about, and I've been having a lot of conversations about the last couple of days, and will continue to do so over the coming weeks. And so the Arroyo Management Plan talks about how these should be preserved, managed, and addressed through various development that will inevitably happen around them. And so in many cases, in recent developments and development in the past, you've seen homes and development and shops come right up adjacent to the arroyos and kind of eliminating some of the scenic value and ecological functions that they serve. And so what the Arroyo Management Plan proposes and recommends is including a buffer. So outside of the main channel of the arroyo is to have some additional space set aside for vegetation as well as for active uses such as trails. And this is an idea that we can take, especially for the key arroyos, and turn into an amenity for the community. This illustration shows how instead of backing up all the homes and shops to the arroyos, houses confront them and have trails and public spaces lining them. So instead of trails through arroyos in your backyard, which may lead to uncomfortable situations or maybe a decrease in privacy, they become essentially the front door or the main entrance, and can be a place where views are created looking down the arroyo out towards the Oregon Mountains. So this is a concept that is included in the Arroyo Management Plan, as well as some of the other planning documents in the city. And this is not just a trail or a dirt path within the Arroyo itself, but working within that buffer between where development is and where the water flows when the rain does occur. And so this is just a quick high-level overview of some of the 3 important documents plus the Elevate Las Cruces plan that we will be working with. And it's important to take this all into consideration because the site is really quite beautiful. You have gorgeous views looking east across the Arroyo towards the Oregon Mountains, which are just 8 miles away. Lots of native plant species, mesquite, creosote, and tarbush. And trails like this have been done in the region. So the Playa Drain Trail is phase 1 of a 60-mile trail planned in El Paso. And so while this one is adjacent to a channel that has since been lined in concrete and not quite in a natural state, the concept remains the same, is that following these paths, or paths of the arroyos, we can create shared use paths and places for people to enjoy the scenery, as well as for getting around when the weather's not over 100 degrees, really making the connection between different neighborhoods, existing developments, new developments, and being able to share some of the benefits in the town center that may one day exist if the vision from Elevate Las Cruces comes to be. So before we get to this next round of polling questions, I'd like to introduce you to Victor Dover, from founding partner of Dover Coal and Partners, who will give us a quick introduction to neighborhood design.
Thanks, Rob. You'll need to turn on my screen sharing so I can bring up the food for thought about neighborhoods. You know, Rob and Jason are too polite to tell you, but I'll go ahead and confess it to our friends in Las Cruces. We actually have the best job we could imagine having. What we get to do is work all over the country and help communities figure out what they want to be when they grow up. And it's noble work. You know, it's also hard work because growth and change come with a lot of natural controversy. They bring up fears, really, that growth and change might make things worse rather than better. And so we like to look at the kinds of growth and change that make things better rather than worse, that help make the place you love more complete and more livable rather than some sort of trade down as a result of the change. And the secret to that really is that we can't just plan by the numbers, you know, the number of dwelling units or the number of square feet or for commercial development, that kind of thing. We have to plan with design and think about what kind of place we're making and design it that way so it turns out to be a place people love. And similarly, we have to realize that it's important to not build everywhere, that there are some parts of any given tract of land that are meant to remain in open space or in civic space or open to the sky, unencumbered or in their natural state. And so we like to think also you can make change and growth that makes things better rather than worse. When you start with the open parts, you start with the open space, the green parts. So let's talk about neighborhoods. I think in the end, knowing what a neighborhood is and thinking about how to make a neighborhood that's unique and appropriate to the place is the key to success here. And as you travel around through our portfolio, if you go to dovercoal.com and you look, you'll see we worked in a lot of interesting places, including in the Desert Southwest and the Intermountain West and the West Coast and the East Coast, the Midwest, North and South. And the projects don't look the same as you look from one to the next. Here's one for Atlanta. There is very much, you know, American mercantile architecture, the kind of place that Atlantans knew to build. And while everything in this picture is new development, it's designed so that when you go there, it feels like it was built the natural way to build in that environment, and proved very popular as a result. So I'm just going to show you a few examples of this approach because this is here at the beginning of our planning process is our chance to get to know one another. We want you to know where we're coming from and what we think about when we roll out a map of a piece of land that its owners and its neighbors are scrutinizing very closely. These are some of the kinds of things we're thinking about. Now, I'll show you one here because it relates directly to differentness. Ion, which is the name of an odd name, the name of a village, a new neighborhood really, in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, is not at all like its neighbors. It's very different from the surrounding subdivisions or shopping centers and wilderness areas and port terminals and so on that are nearby. But the difference actually is its advantage. It was, of course, a marketing advantage to differentiate itself in the marketplace, but also it feels really good when you're there, and that really made it possible for people to fall in love with it. And when you visit Ion, you'll see the buildings are closer together than the neighboring buildings in nearby subdivisions. They're more upright. They are closer to the street. In fact, there was this deliberate effort in Ion, instead of pushing the buildings farther apart from one another, to bring them close together, so that front porches and stoops were within conversation distance of the sidewalk. So this would be a kind of neighborhood where people would get to know their neighbors. And it has some special places that are different from the rest. So it's not all designed like a commodity where every house or every square foot of every commercial building is like every other house or every other square foot. In fact, we did everything we could in the design to create unique addresses. Like here, there's a canal, and it could have just been a ditch, but instead we made it a canal walking street. So these are the fronts of the houses that actually face that space. And so as it turns out, the values are very high. In fact, all through Ion, the property values have turned out to be very high. When we start talking about doing something that's a little different or would actually be a trade up, there's always alarm. Is this going to bring property values down? Is this is this new traditional neighborhood you're thinking about going to somehow be a drag on the progress or livability of its surroundings? And Ion kind of proved the opposite. This map is designed so that spikes that go up are representations of the relative property tax revenue per year per acre in this part of Old Charleston and Mount Pleasant. And so, of course, in the middle, toward the top and right of your screen is the historic downtown, where they've been building for 300 or 400 years and gradually making it more and more valuable, and it's incredibly historic. On the left side of the map is the beach, and that's where the long views of the Atlantic Ocean are, and that's the value, like to say, the Almighty created that. In fact, it's pretty architecturally grim, but it still commands high values. In the middle is Ion, and on either side of it, to the left and right, are very comparable subdivisions. The difference is the design. And Ion has this amazing sort of newly created spike in the property tax map. And I'll just say, if you're a city manager or a mayor or someone running a parks district or a school district, you look on a map like this, you hope for some spikes, because that's how you replace the roof on City Hall when you need to, or how you keep the parks operating at a high level of service. On a map like this, the vertical spikes pay for all of the light gray and light purple stuff that is generating more demand in municipal services each year than is generated in revenue. So vertical spikes are good. And of course, when you actually visit Ion, you immediately see why this is true, because the design makes it's so compelling. It's like you go there and it feels like a place where people want to be. So that's really the test, isn't it? A place where people want to be. Are we going to just design a habitat for cars that people tire of as soon as the anchor tenants gray out, or as has happened a lot recently with shopping malls go bankrupt? Or are we going to build a place where people want to be, that there can be loyalty to it? It has an address value that is longer lasting than, say, what tenant is in the ground floor of a given building in a given decade. And maybe some of those buildings we add can change their uses over time. And instead of being focused on how much parking we can fit in, how about accommodating the parking, but focus on how much great public space in streets and parks and squares we can create. I like to put it this way. It's an old cartoon I drew a long time ago called "Where Would You Prefer to Live?" And this one, for what it's worth, was traced from an aerial photograph of some typical 20th century American sprawl. And this one is a cartoon, takes all the same elements and rearranges them by design. So where would you prefer to live? You know, what do you want the memorable center of your community to be like? In a picture like this, as Jason described, there's places to shop, and there are places to work, and there's places to buy a meal, there are houses, there are housing, but they're all separated as if they're resting on little asteroids, the shape of their parcel. And in this one, all the same things, places to shop or work or eat, or houses and housing, but they're integrated by design. So that kind of connectedness and compactness allows you to create a place where the development doesn't have to go off forever across the horizon in order to satisfy human needs. That's a key point, compactness. It might sound a little counterintuitive, but one of the keys to preserving open space is to not spread everything out. So if you just build a little bit of development everywhere, eventually all of your long horizons disappear. But if you can deliberately cluster, build a conservation mindset into the neighborhood form, then you can preserve long views across open space in perpetuity. And you have all the city comforts and benefits and conveniences and economies that come with being in town, along with the sense that the countryside has remained unviolated. Now, in our work, a lot of what we get asked to do, whether we're working for local governments and community groups, which is about half the time, or working for developers the other half of the time, is we help them figure out how to fix the problems that have been created through carelessness. So here's a dead Kmart. What do you do with it? And then the concept for replacing the dead Kmart with a real neighborhood. It'll still have retail, not as much, but also have some places to work and a lot of variety in places to live. And we learned about how to design traditional neighborhoods by working in historic traditional neighborhoods and helping sort their problems. So this is, for example, in Tennessee, an old part of town, built up in the railroad era, but fell on hard times in the mid-20th century. This is how we found it in the 90s. So this is the before picture, and here's the after picture. The neighborhood in Southside got better as a result of change. We actually filled in the lost space, reconfigured it, put front porches on the houses so that they had a neighborliness to them, revved up the effort to restore and reuse historic buildings, turn the lights back on in the historic buildings. But, you know, of course, our motive all the time working on those projects was to figure out the DNA of recyclable and revivable traditional historic neighborhoods, so that we were called on to do a new one, we knew what to do. So a lot of our work now involves this kind of land recycling approach. Very often, the task is to take a tract of land that had only one economic reason for being and find a way to infuse it for the 21st century with more economic reasons for being. And that means exploring the possibilities of mixed use and so on. Now, we just dropped this term, neighborhood, casually, but I want to try and define it for you a little bit. In fact, in planning circles, in planning school, we learn about this historically. A person named Clarence Perry actually codified the traditional neighborhoods that he observed in great towns and cities from all over the world. And he put it into a kind of rule diagram that you see here on the left, which was published in the 1920s. And he basically specified size and the kind of connectedness within the neighborhood that should be there. And this has actually been updated a few times. Doug Farr's book, Sustainable Urbanism, not long ago, did a major update on Clarence Perry's neighborhood unit to incorporate modern concerns about resilience and sustainability. And if you want to know more about all this stuff, here's my blatant ad. Go to the Dover Cole YouTube channel and you can watch really short, see these numbers here, minute, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, really short videos that describe the basics of town planning stuff, including the neighborhood unit that everyone wants to know. Episode 5 is all about the 5 basic features of traditional neighborhoods. Now, one thing to realize is that neighborhoods aren't all shaped the same. And they're certainly not, in most cases, circular. But even if they're on flat topography or on rugged topography, you can see common things between neighborhoods, 5 big ideas. And I'm going to walk you through these 5 and what the way I hope you'll look at them as a test or a checklist you can apply to our work when we come back with draft scenario plans. But new traditional neighborhoods are the building block for larger settlements. So when we have enough land for a single one, alone in the wilderness, we call that a village. And when we have a larger area to settle, multiple neighborhoods, call it a town or a city. But in this way, there's a little village in the Cotswold is a neighborhood, and Washington, D.C. or Paris or Barcelona are cities made of neighborhoods. And within the neighborhoods themselves, there's a lot of variety, and we're going to talk more about that momentarily and more with you over the coming weeks. But let's look at those 5 things. First, the neighborhood is limited in size. As a rule of thumb, about 5 minutes walk from center to edge. That's a quarter mile. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but the most important one is that it's an amount of territory that human beings can come to comfortably know in great detail by heart. We also look at it as a distance within which we'd like to find things within walking distance, 5 minutes walk from center to edge. Next, you find that a proper neighborhood has an identifiable center and edge. Maybe the edge is where the open space or the green belt or the farmland meets the edge of the neighborhood, or maybe it's where 2 neighborhoods abut on a main street. But you know when you've gotten to the edges of it. Maybe more importantly, you know when you've gotten to the center of it. You realize when you come to the center of the neighborhood, the heart of the neighborhood, that you've arrived somewhere special. Next, when we put that pattern into effect, it tends to generate a pattern of blocks and streets, right? I will say next, the neighborhood has a mix of land uses. That's some of life's basic daily needs met within the neighborhood itself, and a variety of housing types. This allows, say for that old rule of thumb, if you can buy a quart of milk within 5 minutes walk of your neighborhood, that's a more livable neighborhood. And it's also one where you're more likely to accomplish some basic daily needs with short driving trips or even walking, biking, and transit trips. And fourth, when we call it a neighborhood, it has an integrated network of walkable streets. That's a lot to say, an integrated network of walkable streets, but it's not necessarily a harsh grid. It could be very much modified for topography, but it's more like a web and less like a tree in its form. And then last, we'd like to see in real neighborhoods some land set aside for civic purposes like public buildings and public gathering spaces. So when we talk about neighborhoods, we're actually not saying subdivision or shopping center or office park, because we see it as an integrated thing that has probably some of all of the above. It also is common in the neighborhoods we designed to have variety within the neighborhood itself physically. So things might be more relaxed, more detached, more space between them, lower density, greater lot sizes and so on toward an edge, whereas things are brought more close together, more attached, more mixed use, maybe taller, and so on toward the center. And I'll show you just a couple of examples of applying these principles on real projects. This is one of our Mountain West projects. This is in Colorado, in a town called Buena Vista. In Miami, we would say Buena Vista. They say Buena Vista, trust me. But it's called South Main because it extends the main street to the riverfront. And South Main has those same features applied in its plan. It turns out to be a great place to live if you're an outdoors enthusiast, or because it preserves the wonderful views of the mountains and the hillsides. And it turns out to be a great place to grow up because it's quiet, it's tranquil, and it's connected. And free-range children thrive in South Main. One of the reasons for that is because we started with the green parts, as I mentioned at the beginning. So they aren't a remnant or a leftover. They actually form the shape of the neighborhood. And that, if you go from plan to plan in our portfolio, you're going to see that idea again and again. Because we think that the parks are not something that's just left off the map or set aside for a landscape architect to lay out later on. Rather, it's actually a great address maker, just as a good street should be. So one of our rules of thumb is to require in the architecture and the private development, street-oriented, street-shaping architecture, and then in between, open, comfortable public spaces, including tree-lined streets, and open space. Now, to get all that to happen, this is South Main's technical plan. I know it's a lot of little lines and numbers and stuff, but we actually go to quite a bit of detail in these plans in order to specify, for example, the buildings to street relationships on a map. So we know where that front porch is going to go or where the front of the building belongs, so we can have them facing one another and make agreeable street scenes. And it's really not that complicated. And what happens is you can have the buildings vary from one another quite a lot, and yet they're in general agreement and make a street that feels natural. And South Main, just as an example, has very quickly, for such a young place, generated a following of people who love being there. They started with a little cottage rental program, then they built a sizable inn, and then now an even bigger hotel as components of this, all natural economic steps that took place as the neighborhood got better and better. So I keep talking about deliberately bringing things closer together by design. That means more housing variety. So for example, we can do row houses or townhouses that are attached to each other and are close to the street, but have private gardens or backyards, and kind of seal the edges of a block. That's one technique. Certainly not something we would do everywhere, but there should be in most neighborhoods a place where that's the norm. Now, why bother with trying to get more density? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but here's one that might be of interest to those who are following sustainability subject matter. First, when we bring things closer together and it is a little more intense or denser, the driving drops and the carbon footprint drops. This is not too surprising, right? Because you have things closer together, you don't have to go as far, then there's less driving. But this is something that's always been true of the old parts of town and is rarely true in the newly developed parts of town. Now the next one might surprise you a little bit. And that's the connectedness of the street network. Remember I said more like a web, less like a tree. When we have more connections, more intersections, more interconnectedness, you also shorten trips and your carbon footprint drops pretty remarkably as a result of that move. And even more surprising, if you have mixed uses, including some storefront businesses, like a place to get a meal or a convenient place to satisfy some of your basic daily needs, once you get to enough choices, then within walking distance of the neighborhood, your carbon footprint can drop like a rock. So if for no other reason, it's worth exploring how to be most efficient with land. So in our projects, we get into some fairly detailed three-dimensional models, exploring how to bring things closer together. This is for a new development called Newfield, and how to build the first phase so that that variety is on display. And you know, in fact, the first phase should be like an example of how good you want the rest of the neighborhood to be. Newfield, which is in Martin County in Florida, is actually a vast place and required master planning for the whole, even while early phases were just getting started. But that allowed us to really figure out where the important land was to preserve for long views across open space or for natural and ecological values, and where development would do less harm by disturbing the land. And the plan is really built around that idea. But it's also built around the idea of the neighborhood. So here again, the little walking distance circles as a way of checking ourselves. It's a test for that 5 minutes walk from center to edge. And you can see how the plan is built up from multiple neighborhoods. Now, in that place, some of it looks like this, where you have long views across open space. And some of it looks like this, where I have cafe seating in front of a business, or overlook the neighborhood square. And most of it looks like this: houses and gentle street and public space designs. So that whole idea of the neighborhood as a building block. Here's one sample neighborhood within the plan. I've said interconnected a few times. I just want to make sure I get across why that's so important. When people seek isolation in the suburbs, it's often because they're worried about traffic congestion. And that's one of the reasons why new development can be controversial. People fear that it's going to generate a lot of unwanted traffic at the peak hour and bring everything down for everybody in that way. Well, interconnecting the streets is absolutely crucial for avoiding unnecessary traffic congestion. Now, when you push things farther apart and lengthen everybody's trips, and then disconnect the street network, that's a guarantee that everybody will end up on the same streets at the same time. So if there's somewhere you are and somewhere you want to be, your origin, your destination, you want to figure out how to get from one to the other, how to get from A to B. If there are only a few streets and there aren't many connections, then everybody has to take the same route. But when there are multiple ways to go from here to there, you get more ways to go. So here's a simple 2x2 grid, and that generates 6 routes from A to B, not including any that are involving doubling back. So interconnecting is a basic idea, but it turns out to be pretty crucial. Now, from the point of view of market and placemaking and tax base, more edge, more frontage, more front porches and fronts of things, more storefront, those are happening at the edges of blocks, so more blocks generates more value. So for example, 8 by 8 in that same space is 12,870 ways to go from A to B in the same amount of space. Last idea I'll leave with you is to think about the variety. We used to naturally build variety into neighborhoods. Here's a standard house in the center, nice front porch on the front. To the left of it, a very modest, low slung, small square footage, and 0-step entrance for occupied by a senior. This is a grandmother, right on the same block, right in the same distance from the street, and the cat casually walking across the street as the house in the middle. And then off to the right, you can see part of it, a much grander and bigger house with fancier architectural detailing that sells for a higher price point. So right here, 3 houses, 3 different price levels, 3 different sizes, 3 different levels of finish in the neighborhood. There's a topic of great importance these days, which is how to, within modern financing instruments and in new development, get some of the development types that naturally provided for housing that was attainable by people, but left the neighborhood more charming. So in America, we've gotten good in recent years at building single-family detached houses on large lots, and as a nation, we've gotten pretty good at building larger apartment complexes or condo complexes. But in the middle, all those traditional forms like duplexes and triplexes, courtyards, bungalow courts, row houses, live-work units, those have become more and more scarce. What we've discovered is that when markets that have been starved for those types find a small amount of the inventory introduced, they become very popular because there's pent-up demand for them. So here, for example, on the left are some very simple row houses that have very narrow frontage, so they're inexpensive to construct each. But then again, because there's only just so much face, they have fancy brick detailing on them. And on the right, that's a computer model. Those are constructed now. Those are live-work units in Oklahoma City. Why pay 2 rents or 2 mortgages when you can pay just 1? Another form of that variety comes out with accessory dwelling units, or as they're sometimes called, granny flats or in-laws quarters. The idea of a small house behind the house, or a small dwelling attached to the garage or in the English basement. This is an extra dwelling unit on the lot, but it provides a naturally occurring form of affordable housing. So if you're that young cello teacher at the university and you need a place to live, you don't need a lot of space, this might be a really good place for you. You can live in dignity. And if they're done architecturally well, they can add a lot of charm to a community instead of taking it away. I think this variety will be more important than ever in Las Cruces as you confront the aging of the population. So this illustrates, for example, the idea of a deliberately clustered village in a small remnant of land surrounded by the more conventional single-family detached houses. But here, if you have one of those big houses and you age out, you're an empty nester, and your children have moved on, you might find a place here for a small cottage without a big yard to maintain, or even an attached house, or in the center, not an apartment complex, just a simple courtyard apartment building. Another version of that idea of thinking in variety is illustrated here, where the bigger building is an assisted living facility. The seniors, for example, that need a more continuous care. but around it is housing for caregivers. People who operate assisted living facilities find that it's very difficult to find caregivers. Pay them very well, but there aren't enough of them graduating every year to meet the great demand. And yet, they don't get paid quite enough to live in the fancy neighborhoods. They have to live far away and drive in, so their commutes are miserable and expensive. And so here's a way of adding housing for caregivers to basically recruit and retain the best talent for looking after our parents. So anyway, my name is Victor Dover. I'm going to be following along with Jason and John and Rob and working on this project. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I look forward to talking with you more about neighborhoods. Jason.
Rob?
Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Jason. So we will now just go back into a couple, should be able to see my screen now. We have a second round of polling questions, and then we just have maybe just 2 more minutes of presentation after that, and we'll jump into question and answer. All right. So now poll should have popped up on your screen, and it'll be same situation, same format as last time, just some new questions. All right. So the first question is, how often do you walk or use a bike instead of drive? And the answers are just pick one: very often, every day; often, just about every week; sometimes, rarely, or never. And then the second question, kind of a future one: what if there was safe and comfortable places to walk or bike? How often would you walk or bike instead of drive if those places existed? And then the last question of this series is, what elements would make Mesa Vista a place you'd want to live? And this one you can choose 2 if you like. Multiple looping trails along the arroyos, a destination place with restaurants and shopping, such as a new small plaza, multiple options for affordable living, leafy green streets where people want to walk and bike and where it's safe and comfortable to do so, mix of small parks and large parks, place with unique context-sensitive architecture, high-quality schools, a dark night sky so you can see the stars, and other. And then the last question is, which will tie us into the end, is do you have the August 31st through September 4th charrette on your calendar? As a reminder that you should add it to your calendar to stay involved in the project and to have a chance to help in crafting what the plan will look like. And about 50% have answered the poll. So we'll give it maybe another minute or 2, just so everyone can read the questions and put in their responses. And so when we do get to the public design charrette in a couple weeks, it'll be a week-long event with different events held every day, with a lot of chances for you to join in, add to the conversation, do some drawing with us, and then we'll be presenting different ideas, actual drawings for Mesa Vista, and we'll be asking, what do you think of it? And we'll be able to take your responses. Maybe it's a great idea and we can move forward with it, or maybe it's something that needs to be rethought. And so that'll be the time for us to post the idea, get feedback, and redraw if necessary until we get it right. And so it's important to get as many people involved as possible so we can have a plan that will benefit the entire community. We'll just give this until maybe 15 or 20 more seconds, I think, and then we'll go ahead and close this out. All right, I think that's pretty much everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and quickly go through some of the responses and then move into question and answer. All right, and so now you should be seeing the results of our polls. So for the first question, how often do you walk or bike instead of drive? Vast majority never or rarely do so. Maybe this is because you prefer not to, or it's hot, or maybe it's because there's nowhere safe and comfortable for doing so. Yet there are some people that do bike pretty often, whether it's once a day or maybe once a week, or sometimes. And then, when we ask the question, how often would you do so? The answer is kind of inverse to more people being willing or wanting to be able to bike, even if it's just once a week. And some maybe will bike less frequently. But it's interesting because no one picked never. So that's a really big change. And so there is a demand for biking, and the last few months have shown us that biking has been a tremendously popular way of getting around and getting outside and being able to safely socialize and enjoy being in nature and being in your neighborhood. The third question, what elements would make Mesa Vista a place you'd like to live? So the one that got the most votes was multiple looping trails along the arroyos. And so this is something that we look to do when we're planning large areas like this, is not just to have one or two trails, but to really create different loops, places where you can start from, and if you want to just do a short 5 or 10-minute walk, you can have that, and also a longer one. So if you want to go out for miles or go further out into the desert, then those would be options as well. So having a lot of different range to meet different people's needs and your needs at different times. Well, the second highest was a destination place with restaurants and shopping. I think this really gets at what the Elevate Las Cruces plan got at with designating this area for the town center. It's really a place where you can go to, and maybe it won't be as big as some of the examples we've shown, but a place where it can be as simple as being able to grab a coffee or go out for a dinner, and then be able to walk around for a little bit, sit in a plaza, and have a place where you can go out for a night or an evening. And dark night skies is really important. At the edge of the desert, it's critical to have this for tourists and for locals. It's a beautiful thing, and us in Miami don't get to experience it too often, but we do enjoy it when we go out there. And then a mix of the others have all got a bit of a mix for affordable housing, leafy green streets, and all important things for creating a new neighborhood here. And lastly, do you have the August 31st December Forest Charrette on your calendar? This is mostly just a reminder that we will be back in town virtually for this event. All right. So we just have a couple more slides and we'll wrap up the presentation. So for the virtual charrette, the hub will really be our website, mesavistamasterplan.com. There you'll be able to see a presentation from tonight will be recorded and placed up there. All the drawings that we do will be placed there. You go to the page at the top, you'll be able to see the about, where you can learn a little more, events, different events coming on. And then the engage page, we have polls and surveys available now for you to fill out and give more feedback. And the virtual charrette hub will be where we're hosting have our meetings available for watching or joining in. All the material that we'll be producing will be posted up there, and ways for you to respond to that will be there as well. And so finally, we'd like to leave it off on this image. This is really kind of a summary of everything we talked about tonight. So it's not just the town center, or not just single family homes, but really a mix of everything coming together to create a new kind of place that doesn't quite yet exist in this area. So small parks mixed in with large open spaces at the edges, housing variety from small homes to townhomes, the accessory dwelling units, all in the same block, hot lots, places where people can go for playgrounds and little cafes. And so really kind of the whole summary of the transect and neighborhood design kind of viewed in this one image. So with that, I'd like to thank you for coming and listening into us, and we'd like to open it up for question and answer. And how this will work is you can raise your hand. On the bottom of your screen, there should be a little icon, looks like a little hand, and you'll be able to click on that, and then we can allow you to speak and ask your question. Alternatively, you can just send us, the panelists, a text, a message in the chat box, and we can answer your question through that. And so we did cover a lot of material tonight, and this will not be the last time for asking questions or providing feedback, and this is really actually just the beginning. And so we will have a lot of questions, and you can give us feedback through the survey on the website as well.
Rob, looks like we've got a question John might want to take about how soon this project will start. And maybe this is a good time for John to unmute and introduce himself anyway. John, there you are.
Sure. Good evening. The planning process will take the better part of a year, and after that, we still have a lot of work to do, planning major infrastructure. Remember, the master planning process is really designing the basic concept, setting forth the design parameters, doing all of the things that were described this evening. After that, there is a long process of creating construction drawings and determining with our relationship with the State Land Office how we would proceed through the acquisition process on the half section that we have under lease already, and how we can proceed with the pending lease application and perhaps ultimate purchasing of the additional property. So really, till you see structures coming out of the ground, we're looking at the better part of 3 years at least. Like I said, it's a very complex project, a lot of moving pieces. We have much to incorporate in terms of coordinating with city departments, Parks and Recreation, Community Development, Public Works, utilities. We had a good conversation with the utilities people today. So that's really the earliest you would see structures coming out of the ground, 3 years. And it's a long-term project. If we are able to develop the full 800 plus acres that we'd like to, that's a 10 to 20 year project easily. But there is a growing demand for housing in Las Cruces. In our conversations with community development over the past week or so, the staff there indicated that recently, in 2 consecutive months, they have broken records for new home permits. So we'd like to think that this will meet a lot of demand in Las Cruces. The Sonoma Ranch development south of here is quickly building out. And at some point in the near future, Mesa Vista will be really the only large master plan being developed in the area south of Highway 70. So we think it'll have an important role in the growth and future of Las Cruces. And we really look forward to working with Land Office, with city staff, and obviously continuing the work with Dover Coal and SMA.
We also got just I guess a comment from Earl about really liking the Adobe style of Tucson, and so there's something to look forward to is what styles and architecture could be applied here, and there's a lot of great examples happening in southern Arizona right now. There's also the Mercado District and a few other new neighborhoods. And so we have a hand raised from Wes Strain, so I'll allow you to speak and feel free to ask us your question. So you'll have to unmute yourself, Wes, by clicking, there you go. You should be able to talk now. Unfortunately, we're not able to hear you. Perhaps you can make sure that you're the correct mic setting. You have the correct mic setting on for your Zoom. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little microphone icon. And you can select using the little arrow from there which microphone may be operating. And if we can't figure that out, feel free to type into the chat box. You should see the little chat icon as well, and we can get your question through that.
Well, while Rob works with Wes, anyone else want to raise their hand? Anyone else have any questions? Here's one from Joel Peterson. Are there resource limits to be factored in here, especially water, sewer, and other city services? Yeah, good question. So one of our first meetings was with the city utilities department, and we talked specifically about water, sewer. And this is an area that actually has quite a bit of capacity. The lines that were installed are lines that can service the growing population. So on one level, no, there's no capacity problems. None of the lines are at capacity. We're able to service these areas. But in another sort of zoomed out way, you think about the desert and you think about water, and the world's getting warmer and drier. And we need to think about where water is coming from and where it will come from in the long term. And recycling water, using green infrastructure to retain water, and making sure that we're able to reuse water has to be a big part of this process and part of all land development from here forward. So we've got the utilities, we just need to make sure you never reach a day when you turn on the faucet and the water doesn't come. Let's see, Mary Pack asked, do you already have an overall general plan for connectivity to existing areas such as Mesa Grande Estates and Sonoma Ranch? I'll show you something really quick. This is just kind of funny, but I'm going to show it to you. You know, when it comes to designing a site like this, it isn't that hard to imagine how you connect the streets through. My wife is part of Dover Coal, and while we're presenting, she's in the other room drawing. She's got 2 degrees in city planning, and it takes her about 15 minutes to draw a conventional development. She just brings the roads through and she turns it into cul-de-sacs, and it isn't hard. And you can see some of the connections. So the long-range transportation plan has east-west arterial roadways and north-south arterial roadways. Let me get those names. And what she did is she just connected those through, and you see down from the north, you see.
So the main one in the middle is North Rise Drive, kind of connecting from the Pueblos, and at the bottom east-west one is Pegasus.
Right. So here's North Rise Drive, and this is Pegasus Drive. Now again, these have been on the books for a long time, for 20 years. The Long Range Master Plan talks about those, and then it talks about this one. This is Mesa Grand Drive, and then over here is Mesa Avenue. So those are the logical places to connect. So now let me show you what and again, not hard to imagine those connections. Let me show you what creative development looks like. But I can't, because creative development can't be drawn in just 15 minutes. There's my wife at the kitchen table, drawing and drawing and drawing. She's been drawing for 2 days. There's my son, gets a lot of TV time when we're both working. This is, we're taking input and we're trying to come up with these solutions. You know, in the next few days and the next week and the week after, it takes time. It takes a lot of time and a lot of input to draw creative development. But the Long Range Master Plan provides the routes for the major arterials. What it doesn't tell us is the character of the streets. Right now, the existing regulations talk about very wide 4 or 6 lane major arterials that would, you know, move quite a bit of traffic quite quickly through the site. What creative development does, what Pam's working on in the other room, is the character of that of those streets changing. So to be context sensitive. So when they reach the downtown, they turn into walkable mixed-use street. You know, when they're moving large distances across the prairie, then they might be a little bit wider. You know, conventional development, it's pretty much 2 kinds of street sizes. Creative development involves a lot more variety. And
Jason, one way to look at this is we know there's a better answer than this, and it's going to take us a little while to find it, but we will find it. And so we kind of know that there's a baseline or a starter pattern, but we know there's a better one out there, and we will find it. So don't despair. We're going to look for it. But that's where one of the places where we could use a lot of help from the folks who live in the surroundings and who care a lot about Las Cruces, you know, pointing us toward the examples of what they really love in the region, you know, that we could attempt to emulate. And this is similar to the question that was asked a moment ago about architecture. At this point right now, all the possibilities should be on the table for discussion. We haven't been given any limits, any, you know, hard sort of multiple choice limited palette by our client on what architecture could be like, or what the you know, how the split between various unit types might be, you know, in the housing, for example, or what the commercial area will look like architecturally. That's something we have to find together. And I think right now is the exciting part, because we'll narrow down from the universe of options to the things that seem to make the most sense or feel the most natural here. But we can use some help finding that. The usual, our pattern historically is we will find it in the local DNA of the best things in your region that people love because of the way that they make place. And then we will try to bake that DNA into the new things.
And then Joel Peterson asks, is there a targeted split between residential, commercial, retail, open and green space, and business? And that's a good question. We do have a preliminary market study of a kind, which talks about you know, the number of units within driving distance, talks about the number of trips on the road. So we've got some base information, but no, there's not yet a targeted split. We don't yet know how much commercial, how much residential, retail, open, green, or business. In fact, that's one of the questions we really like to pose to the public. That split will determine the character and the experience of the place. Paul Aquino says, 2 big concerns regarding Mesa Grande Estates: the traffic impact on our streets and protecting our view of the Oregon Mountains, which is why we have a home here. Absolutely. So, Victor talked about how we're working to mitigate the traffic impact. The grid of streets, the interconnected network is one way to do it. Now the views, what we're doing, what Pam's doing in the other room, what we've been doing is flying around on Google Earth, essentially standing on your street and looking, and we're recording all the different views, especially up the arroyos, and we're trying to preserve the views as best as possible. You can telescope out development, so that way you're able to keep view corridors. You're able to look at the high points and the low points in order to place buildings in a way that they blend in the landscape. So good point and noted. Traffic impact and protecting the view of the Oregon Mountains. And then Wes Forney says, living in Mesa Grande Estates, having more access and exits from the neighborhood would be good, because right now they're limited to 2 points to Mesa Grande. And that's a good point, yeah. That's what will be one of the things that we're working on. Joel Peterson asks, seems like business commercial areas alongside US 70 are separate from the larger open spaces. Do these areas deserve different plans? Really good point. It's going to be, do they deserve different plans? No. I mean, we want to design everything as connected as possible, but yeah, Highway 70 is a major divide. And I'm not sure how we deal with that yet. But there's an interesting opportunity. Sierra Norte controls both sides of Highway 70. The buildings on one side are facing the other, and there's an opportunity to create a feeling of arrival on an otherwise featureless highway. How exactly to do that, I'm not sure. How exactly to get it so that people can cross comfortably, not sure that there either. But those are absolutely things that we need to work on. And then, yeah, the site is tough. You've got the bottleneck at the top where you've got the high school and development, and then it comes down for quite a bit before you reach any sizable width. Again, design challenges, but and things we've got to look toward. But
I've got a way Joel might think about that question. They each deserve plans, but they're 2 different parts of one plan, and they each deserve detail. So why not? We'll just work out a detailed plan for each of these areas. The constraints are different, the objectives are different, but in the end, these individual parcels and your neighbors, you're all in this together, and it ought to feel like all one thing when you're done.
Thomas Winter asks, what's the likelihood of getting the proposed leased land? Will development proceed without it? Yeah, so I mean, right now Sierra Norte owns quite a bit of land. The land up top, which was yellow before, and they're creating a plan for the land west of Mesa Vista Drive, and development will pursue. I mean, that's a lot. That's 400 acres. But in order to create the town center that's envisioned in the comprehensive plan that people wanted to see out east, it's hard to imagine without a sizable residential population of houses that can walk and bike to the town center. Without a good connection, it's hard to grow a vibrant town center. There's so much land along Highway 70 that just doesn't have anything on it. It's just waiting for commercial. We need to do something different here. And we don't want buildings surrounded by parking. And so people have to have a different way to come. I would hate to see just the 400 acres developed and not the 800, because then, that's only 400 acres worth of people who could walk and bike comfortably. And that's a whole lot of people who would have to resort to driving. How will you meet or exceed New Mexico's dark sky regulations? Coming into this conversation, we're learning more about it. And we were finding out fast that this is something that people are really interested in. Like Rob said, we envy the desert Southwest and places like New Mexico, because you can see the stars and the Milky Way and the meteor shower we missed last night because Miami produces so much glare. I'm not sure we have the specifics yet, but absolutely, dark skies, both required and something that we want to see in this new community.
But we won't have to scratch our heads trying to figure out how to get started, because we have tools like the International Dark Sky Association standards, LEED for neighborhood developments, and then of course the New Mexico standards. So in the end, dark sky is a given in this project. We have that light down where you need things lit, like to be safe on the sidewalk beneath your feet. We don't need to aim it up into the night sky and interfere. So it's just got to be a given.
There's an observatory out east of El Paso, and they produced some dark sky guidelines that I always thought were excellent. They're talking about preserving the observatory's ability to see the stars, but they're absolutely applicable to neighborhoods everywhere. And yeah, like Victor said, it's largely about aiming the light where you want it at no more intensity than you need, and preventing glare.
There's a new question from Paula Aquino that maybe John wants to take. It's about the timeline for the lease that you mentioned.
Sure. The quick answer to that is it will be determined by a series of discussions with state land office leadership and staff. Right now, we don't have a timetable. I can say that we have worked with the land office in a prior master plan development, Metro Verde, north of here. We had a planning and development lease, and we worked successfully to acquire that land. And so I guess in that respect, we're batting 1,000. I hope we continue to bat 1,000, but it's a long, complicated process. It's regulated by land office policies, and we just have to abide by those policies just like everybody else would.
All right, well, let's ask for any last questions. And yeah, so this is just our first conversation, and as you can tell, this is a tremendous opportunity, and we're super excited about this project. And so I just want to thank John for inviting us, and I can't wait till this whole COVID thing's over so we can come visit you guys and take a walk in the desert and get to know the land a little bit better. And we just miss leaving the city and miss going to New Mexico. Rob and I talk about this all the time. Thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for your questions and your comments. Go to the website in order to find out more and in order to keep track. And then again, mark on your calendar if you haven't already, August 31st to September 4th, where we're gonna do this, but a lot more interactively. You'll be able to communicate with Pam in the other room as she draws, and Sue and Allie and a whole team of very talented designers and architects and illustrators. So thank you all for your attention.